Paul from Alexandria Knife Sharpening and Laser Engraving. I thought this might interest some of you out there. I get all kinds of interesting questions all the time, and every once in a while, the last couple weeks, as I've been, showing a lot of the different gear that I use in my shop, one of the questions I get is, what is it you're using your 2x42s for? Like, why the 2x42s more than the 1x30, and what things are you sharpening with it? This is kind of a perfect example of a time I'm going to use my 2x42s. And this is something you should be prepared for too, that you will get. And it also brings up another topic I want to touch on quickly. I won't go into too much depth about it, but it is an important thing. It's probably something I'll do a little bit more in one of the podcasts. But I have mentioned before that I have videos even on it, on your most discerning customers, your most difficult to please customers are going to be EDC guys that are like more on the collector side, not the user side. They will sometimes come at you with a whole litany of requests for something to be done. And if you're brand new to sharpening, and this is a hard message to kind of get across, so if you're brand new, you just started your sharpening business, you don't want to say no to anybody. You're trying to get customers. You don't want to turn someone away. You have to also realize that if you're not ready or good enough yet to sharpen someone's several $100 EDC, and you're charging maybe $15, $16, $17, $18, whatever it is to sharpen that, if you damage that or mess it up, was it worth it if you end up having to replace somebody's knife or replace their thing? Keep that in mind. It is a learning process, and just like anything, you can buy all the gear. You're not gonna be, and I think I've used this analogy before too. You're not going to be Tiger Woods coming out of the gates of sharpening. Just because you can have the very best sharpening gear in the world, the very best machinery, the very best stuff. Just because you own the gear doesn't make you, Tiger Woods of sharpening, or, whatever analogy we want to throw at that. It's not going to make you the best, the very best of the best at doing that particular thing. What makes you the best is experience, doing it over and over again, making mistakes and learning from your mistakes, correcting your mistakes, and just working at it. So that's why I'm also big on, and you always hear me preach, like, yes, you see all this stuff, but you don't need to go buy all this stuff. Pick a machine, become really great at that particular machine. And then as you are sharpening more things, or there's other things you want to get into, add more machines and become an expert at that machine. One of the examples I give for that regularly is my Tormek machines. Now, I shouldn't have bought my Tormek machines when I did, and I have always wanted one of the things in my channel to help guys get the right gear at the right times. And I did definitely made mistakes at, things that I purchased that I could have bought in a much better order. But the one thing that did work out really well for me is I'm very, very good, and I know that, on a Tormek machine. I'm very comfortable sharpening on my Tormek machines because I spent so much time on them before I added other gear. So that's the other reason why I'm like, don't rush to buy every single thing, because you got to spend some time on each one of those machines to become an expert at your particular machine, especially if you're modifying and making your own gear. Keep that in mind. Take on work that you're ready for, and it's okay to say no. And this can be a hard lesson, and I've had a couple people who have, followed me and tried to learn from me and gotten advice from me, who I have had to say, like, they'll send me a job that someone wants them to do, and I've told them, like, hey, it's okay to say no. If you don't think you're ready for this, don't take in that couple $100 shaman knife. And if you're afraid there's a chance you might mess it up, practice, buy other EDCs, get a bunch of, cheap ones from eBay sale from a confiscated TSA guys, and work on those and practice on those before you work on someone's expensive knife. Because is it worth making a $300-$400 mistake that might cost you money and your reputation, or to just say no to something that you're not ready for. And I always found that customers respected that more. If you said, hey, you know what? This isn't my expertise, maybe take it here. Or if you do that, they will have much more respect for you than trying to do something that you're not quite ready for. Back to this particular job, and enough about my soapbox on that topic. This is kind of fits that example a little bit, and as far as like, this is the request that somebody wants done to this particular job. And this is a bunch of machetes. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 machetes that came in. And it wasn't just, I want these machetes sharpened, here's 8 machetes, a whole bunch of requests here. So this, I'll grab this one for instance. This particular machete was only sharpened from here down to about here. The bottom half of this machete down here, I would say the last 4 inches were flat, like completely flat, not sharpened at all. His notes for just this particular machete, he wanted the entire thing sharpened, including this bottom part that wasn't sharpened before. This has a back edge here that can be sharpened, and it wasn't very sharp. It was, you know, barely done. He wants this part sharpened, and that was just one request for this particular machete. We have several different styles here, you know, and on these, what happened is they were sharp. They also had this blank area down at the bottom. They were sharp from about here to here. The curve was very thick and flat and not sharpened at all. Didn't have even bevels across it, and he wants me to sharpen the entire machete, the whole length. And you know, so working on this really thick area. Again, not a problem, but if it's something you haven't done before, you know, this is a job that I wouldn't want to do this on a 1x30. This is a job that, in my opinion, is perfect for a 2x42. You know, something a little bit larger. Now, I also wouldn't do this on my Grizzly 2x42, my new one over there. I actually much prefer this buck tool for this, and that's why I said when I got the different styles, there were reasons for it. I think this buck tool is absolutely perfect for doing machetes. Although it doesn't get used every day, it's for things like this that I love it. I've done plenty of machetes on 1x30s. I'm not saying you can't do it or you shouldn't. I just find them to be much more challenging when I'm taking this big blade to a 1x30 and pushing on it and, you know, working it. A lot of times I found that little 1x30s moved. I really didn't like doing machetes way back when I first started and all my machines were Harbor Freights. I really didn't like doing them at all. I did, but I knew that there had to be a better way, and that was one of the reasons I added 2x42s to my mix. And on this particular one, I'm even doing something a little bit different. I could do it all on the 2x42, but these things were so thick up here in the curve, I'm actually using my 180 grit CBN wheel, and I am freehanding, going edge trailing. All of this is edge trailing. Another thing that you don't always see me do, I do most of my sharpening with the majority of it's kitchen knives and that kind of stuff, edge leading. But when I'm doing big giant stuff like this, yes, I do it edge trailing. When I'm working on my low speed grinder with CBNs, not always am I going edge trailing, but sometimes I am. When I do ceramic knives on this, I use this edge trailing, and I am doing this edge trailing because I feel that's the safest way to do that. But I'm using this to thin this out. One reason that I'm doing the CBN wheels on the grinder is because I am trying to preserve my 50, I think this is 50. Is it 50 or 36? This is a pretty aggressive belt here. Yeah, this is a 50 grit Kubatron. I'm trying to preserve that 50 grit Kubatron, and I know I have a lot of material to remove here, and I can easily do it on, at least get it started on this CBN wheel without putting so much wear on that Kubatron belt. And then what I can do is then I'm going to the belt to, let me make sure you get a good shot here, to just get a beautiful, nice, clean bevel and even this out. And that is what I am currently doing. I'll show you a little bit of it. I'm not going to waste your time with showing you every single one of these. I just thought this was a good example of how you can combine certain tools to get particular jobs done. And one of those questions I just get a lot is about the 2x42 and how I'm going to use it. Let me show you a little bit of what I'm doing here. I have a couple that I haven't even begun to touch yet. 3 or 4 of them I've already started the first process. So I'm doing the rough part first, which is evening it out, getting those parts sharpened that he wanted sharpened that are not sharp, and then I will, go up in progression from there. But I've had requests like this plenty of times over the years. Here is one of those machetes where it's just not sharp here. And it's funny because all these came in a different state too. Some of them were more sharpened in the curve, some of them were a little less. So even the factory that's making these Tramontina blades, I'm pretty sure these are being hand sharpened by somebody there on a belt machine, and they only go so far with it and then they stop. I get requests like this plenty to really go full scale, and some people want them super sharp. I mentioned before I have a lady, it's more in the spring and summertime, who at a farmer's market makes coconut drinks and she's whacking the tops off of them. She's brought me machetes that she needed just wickedly sharp, and I do those for her. All right, so enough of that, and let's get into just a little bit of what I'm gonna do here, and I'll just show you a little bit of it. The CBM wheels on the low-speed grinder, when you get really big stuff, so like really, really big stuff, sometimes even the Kodiak mount just isn't perfect for it. Even this will work to a certain extent, but I would even love a giant one of these would be really cool. So sometimes I actually do have to freehand some things on here. I'm just going to start this up and show you a little bit of what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with thinning this one up here because it's still thick. I'll start with thinning this blade out a little bit, and then we'll go from there. So you kind of get the idea there. I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm literally just thinning this part out here that was not sharpened. You can still see it's a little fat and thick up here. But what I'll do is I'll thin that on both of here to get rid of that, all that extra metal I don't need. And then when I'm ready to actually cut my bevels and really make it even and nice all the way across, then I'm going to jump to my 2x42. The other thing I like to do when I'm working on the 2x42 and doing something like this, and I'm recutting this primary bevel, at first I'm going to start on the platened area, where I can get a nice consistent angle and resistance and cut this in. But eventually I am going to finish this on the slack belt portion. Even when I go up to my Trizact belts that I'm going to use on this, I will be finishing it more in the slack belt area. But for the majority of metal cutting away, I'm going to be working right on this platen. So you can see that's starting to give me a really nice, beautiful bevel, and I'm just going to keep working at it until I'll start to see a burr raising. We still haven't raised the burr, and then I'll go to my other side and kind of do the same thing. Now, You do want to be conscious of your strokes when you're doing this primary metal removal, because we do want to keep things even. So even though we haven't raised a burr yet, it's not a bad idea to make sure you're going back and forth when you're basically reprofiling something. So now I'm going to do the other side, and even though I haven't raised the burr on that side, I do want to keep this nice and even. So you can see it's coming along. We're getting a nice bevel cut. We have a much nicer looking grind now than it came with from the factory. But we're just going to keep working that, keep thinning that out until we get it just right. And eventually I will start to see that burr forming on here. It'll be pretty soon. We're getting very close. Now you will have no problem seeing a 50 grit burr form on a machete. Let me just make sure I'm not going to hit the camera here. So can you guys see that little shiny bit of foily burr starting to raise there? And if you see here up at the tip where it's rounded and was really thick, we still have not raised the burr there. So I'm going to do some tip work on this side because we want to start getting that burr on that whole curve. And we definitely have some areas up here that need to be thinned out a bit. I don't want to thin it too much because I do still want this to be strong. He didn't actually tell me what his purpose was using these. Now I'm really starting to see my burr forming there, and the only place it's missing right is still right up here, this little part at the top. So you can see hopefully it's showing up, we're getting really close to having a full burr across right there. It's this little, I'm working this little area right here where this was really thick and not sharpened. The other good thing about keeping your fingers here, you can feel if it's starting to overheat at all, so you can stop and take breaks if you need to, and this is fine. That's one nice thing about Kubatron belts. They tend to not get very hot. It's very different when we go to the Trizact belts. They generate much more heat. You need to keep moving with those. Okay, now we finally are seeing that burr across that entire blade. So that should give you an idea of also how much time consuming certain jobs can be. So this is, you wouldn't want to charge the same price for just a typical machete sharpening if someone comes in and says, hey, this whole area that's not sharp and thick, like this part of the blade and parts of this were this thick, that they want all that sharpened, because it's going to take more time. So keep that in mind when you're doing your pricing and things like that, because time's money. And, if someone has a whole bunch of special requests for a particular item, you want to make sure you're being compensated on it properly. Now, this is one of those places where I actually like a Trizact belt in a low grit. When you're dealing with machetes, they don't have to be, they're typically not sharpened really at high grits. Like, you don't have to. I get people that want them crazy sharp, so I have gone no problem up to a 600 grit. I've probably done some at 1200, like my coconut cutting lady. I've made hers just crazy sharp. But normally, so this is a 200 grit Trizact, so we just did a 50 grit Cubitron. Now I'm going to take this 200 grit Trizact and start sharpening this. And for most machetes, this would be just fine. I could probably stop here. But this is going to give me a really nice finish, a really nice machined edge look that you're not going to get from that Cubitron, which obviously at 50 is very, very rough. And this is also where I'm going to start working in the slack belt portion a little bit to give this a little bit more of a convex grind, which will make it stronger. Because keep in mind, it's a machete. We want it to have a strong edge on it. All right, so let me give you a look at that 200 grit Trizact edge. Look how beautiful that is. When you have a person that comes in and gives you a page and a half of notes of how they want their machete sharpened, they are looking for something a bit impressive too. So now we have to deburr this. I'm totally fine with that 200 grit Trizact. I don't think we need to take this any higher, but we do need to deburr it. Now, one thing about going a little bit higher, you could go to a 600, like an A30, and do maybe 1 or 2 passes. That's going to also make the deburring process a little bit easier. Whenever you're doing deburring on a really rough grind, it's going to be rough on whatever you're deburring with. And actually, why don't we stick with this whole machine? All right, so I'm gonna show you something that's kind of something new I've been doing, but I do really like it. I would show you this as it's an option out there. I know Cliff has he uses the blue Japanese compound that you'll see sometimes. I didn't have any of the blue, but I do have several compounds. This is probably very close to the same as the blue. I've only ever liked the compounds that aren't gummy. So I like the ones that are a little bit more on the dry side. I really love this purple bar that I got from Combat Abrasives with when I purchased my Airway buffing wheels for buffing. This purple bar is really surprised me of how amazing this does at stropping things. And I've been testing it on my 1x30, And one of the beautiful things about it too is, I mean, look at the massive size of this bar. This thing will last you, you know, forever. It is huge. It's going to last a really long time. You're never going to go through, you know, if you're buffing wheels and buffing things every day. But this has turned out to be a very fantastic stropping aid. So I'm going to put it on 2x42 leather belt. I'm just going to get a little bit on here. Now, I'm using the rough side on this. You can use either side, but I do like the rough side for rough burrs. And, you know, keep in mind, we didn't bring this knife up any higher than 200 on that Trizact. So now I'm going to deburr it on leather, and I'm going to use the rough side. I just kind of like it. You know, you might like the smooth side better, and I would just say there's no right or wrong on that. And on many strops, I use both sides. But if I'm going to use the smooth side, I'm usually putting a diamond emulsion on it. On this side, I'm going to just use purple compound. All right, here we go. And all I'm looking for here, I want to see when that burr starts coming off. And I'm already seeing parts of it flaking off. And if you have some stubborn areas, I have typically found, especially when you've gone edge trailing, it's a little different edge leading, which is normally how I sharpen 90% of the time. I have always found edge leading burrs are easier to remove when you're stropping than are edge trailing. So on edge trailing, you get these kind of foily burrs that take a little bit more work to come off. It's not a big deal, but they just take a little more work or a little bit more aggressive process. Now, I have also used felt wheels, I have used paper wheels, and all of them are great options. And they can be a little bit more aggressive than leather. Leather is pretty soft, and it might take you a little bit longer when you're dealing with that foily burr. But I just see it's coming off, it's flaking off. But as you can see, normally, if this had been an edge leading sharpening that I had done, I probably would have only needed 1 or 2 passes, and I would have had this burr off. And this is taking more, which is normal for edge trailing burrs, as opposed to those edge leading burrs. But it's flaking. I see it flaking off. Yeah, there it goes. And then when you have these little parts where, you know, like I said, sometimes just adjust your angle a little bit. If you have a couple hanger-ons of that foily edge that's just hanging on there. Yeah, and I feel this is probably pretty darn good. Yeah, it's feeling real good. And the other thing that's interesting and kind of funny sometimes too is sometimes your final cut test, your paper cut test, once that burr's really weak, so sometimes you'll do a paper cut test, and the first time it like doesn't seem like it goes through, and then you realize like, oh, you know what, that did it, that removed my burr completely. So you can see how that, you know, you can get a little bit of buildup there on your belt. You know, and remember what I always say, sharp is sharp. It doesn't matter if it's 50 grit, 200 grit, 1,000 grit, like when it's properly deburred and sharpened, does not matter what the grit was. So this is 200 grit Trizact, and you can see this baby is incredibly sharp. Push cutting, slice cutting, and there you go. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And maybe at some point, if you don't have one, you might want to consider adding a 2x42 to your sharpening machines. Because for things like this, if you get into doing lots of gardening gear, machetes, and things like this for people, they're just an invaluable tool to have in your arsenal of sharpening. And here's one last quick tip. If you feel your belt is starting to get a little too gummed up, Or say you want to just try some different abrasives and you have one on there that you want to get off. This is where a old worn down belt is worth keeping around. So I just grabbed, this is a 120 Cubitron style. This isn't even a 3. I'm pretty sure this is a ceramic from Combat Abrasives. But what I'm going to do is just use this to clean this belt off by just coming in here and regrinding my leather a little bit, and it will start taking off any of those spots maybe that you don't like, or if you feel you have some buildup gunk on there, you can start to clean it up with this, and you can see that's starting to come off. And I'll just work that around on here, and then I'll eventually just toss that belt, because it's already was used anyway. So it's almost like the erasers we use to clean these belts out. Similar thing. I'm just using this to clean up this leather belt. That got a little black on me. I don't like them to get glazed over, so I will clean them. And especially when you're dealing with your bigger size leather belts, there's a couple things I try to do. One, take care of it. Two, don't leave it on your machine. You'll stretch it out and then it won't be useful to you. And if I see it drying out a little bit, I will treat them with a little bit of mineral oil or stuff like that. But that's pretty much how I keep my belts going for me for a long time. The one abrasive compound that I absolutely can't stand is green. Some people love it. I absolutely hate it. I find it gums up. It just collects muck. And I have found that to be almost impossible to get off of leather belts. I find that it actually kind of destroys them. And I have found also that a leather belt just completely by itself with nothing on it also works great. You don't even have to necessarily put anything on your leather belt. Is it helpful? Yes, it's an aid, but literally a leather belt with nothing on it by itself is a fantastic strop and will give you also a really nice edge. And some people like that. Some people don't even put anything on their leather belt. And if you do that, it will last a really long time. The only thing you might want to do is if you see it drying out, then just treat it with a little bit of mineral oil, or I a lot of times will use Japanese knife oil, Chimera oil on it. All right, that's it. Have a great day, y'all.